So you have these the software companies that have all sorts of goals. They're having a hard time meeting the needs of innovation, which is I really think what we need. We're on an antiquated system that isn't working nearly as good as it should be. And we're not seeing the types of improvements that we're seeing in other industries. And it's not coming from the software companies. Now we're hoping that some of these newer startups will start to do some interesting things, but are they? I mean, let's really call a spade here. Like, is there really something coming out? I don't think we need to name them. We all know who we're thinking about here. It's not coming from there. The service providers, they're innovating, but they also have a profit motive that isn't necessarily aligned.
It's also incremental innovation. So what you're seeing is it's on the fringes of the big three. So we've got maybe one processing engine, relativity, maybe you guys, maybe relativity analytics, probably more so you guys. You're seeing innovation on the kind of the where you guys kind of the edges, the fringe edges. So either like on ingesting alternative data sources or additional levels of very, very niche analytics or parsing the output of information. So there is innovation, but it's very, very limited in scope. And then you've got maybe some BI dashboarding on top of that and some case management. Those are the 3 or 4 areas that's happening.
But there's not like an iPhone, where it's just like we're not doing keyboards anymore.
But see, there's a problem when you go back to who's buying this and who we're dealing with.
Exactly.
It goes back to the lawyers and the kind of the sophistication of the market of the people buying this stuff.
And the risk profile too.
I think it's the demand too from the ultimate buyer is the corporate, whether it's direct or indirect.
Yes.
But
even their sophistication.
They're sophisticated, but I feel like they approach, in particular, eDiscovery, as if it's going to go away someday. Like it's not going to be a long-term problem.
Yeah.
And where innovation should be happening in the market and it's stalled is, you should be able to take data that's in legal hold and move it right into something you can analyze it in and get brain space or whatever to look at it right there at the corporate level. If you need to review documents, you can push it into something that allows you to make coding decisions, and then you can kick it out the other end to whatever body you need to deliver it to. And people have tried to kick off there, but the demand isn't there because the budgets don't sit there with the corporates. You go to the corporate buyer and you pitch this beautiful idea, and they're like, whoa, are we in litigation right now? And you're like, no, this will solve your problems for years. And they're like, we'll just wait till we have actual litigation.
And that's outside counsel's problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I don't know, that's outside counsel's problem. But by doing that and pushing it onto somebody else and not taking it in-house, I also get the impression that for each individual, now obviously there's some huge serial litigants out there that it makes sense to bring it in. But like outside of them, most of them, it doesn't make sense for those huge investments to build what it would take. So it has to get down to that next level, which is outside counsel. Typically, sometimes they have alternative vendors. But that's when you start getting all these conflicting motives in here where, are these people really going to squeeze all the costs out? I think just on its face, it seems like the solution you're saying, it has to be all the way at the source.
I was going to say, we've seen some tools that maybe meet that, but like you said, the demand wasn't there. But when you look at, first of all, the lawyers who are now popular or becoming in-house, they know how the sausage is made from the law firm side. They're being held accountable by the CFOs to a budget, and they're going to look and say, oh my gosh, we have to save X dollars. Oh, let me just dig a little deeper into my outside counsel budget. I can look like a superstar if I can really get a control of this cost. So I think that's one dynamic. Then you have the clock and the legal operations people starting to really look at it not just from eDiscovery, but data privacy and cybersecurity. All of a sudden, the ROI can come from not just one GL or whatever you want, budget. It's now a combined legal department or the companies.
Well, and shifting the legal department to really be a profit center, really, more than just an operation or a reactive body. It may not be pure profit. They're not generating revenue, but they're saving so much cost proactively versus what others are doing that it is profit.
It's because there's more transparency, because we've had that moving of the chair, so to speak. There's more transparency in the business of doing law, and because there's more transparency, suddenly you've got an organization like Clock where they're saying, all right, well, we're going to treat you like other services we procure. It's not a perfect fit, but I do think you need to look at kind of operating law like a business, and that trickles down to operating and applying technology like a business. And I think that will drive adoption of different tools that promote efficiency. But we've seen amazing tools that people have been terrified of adopting. So it's still going to be a very slow process because we are naturally a risk-averse client base in terms of the attorneys that ultimately have to articulate and defend their choice of using an advanced analytic. We're getting there. There's more sophistication, there's more pressures, but it will be a slower process than any one of us, I think, would ideally like.
Well, and I think that there's going to be, when you look at the companies or corporations looking at, I have 30 lawyers. Who really understands eDiscovery and all this other stuff that's going on? Because we have some law firms who cannot give us a destruction certificate. They cannot tell us where the data is sitting or even fill out these security questionnaires. Well, all of a sudden now, again, that model of picking and choosing and selecting your law firm is going to change the dynamic of those companies or those law firms getting better at that because they're going to start to lose business. So it's just kind of interesting dynamic. It's from all angles because you're seeing big law have what I told you before, the small bigs, but the big law lawyers who are now not jumping to a mid-tier firm, they're starting their own firm. They're taking 10 associates, taking the client, saying, look, I could charge you 60% of the rates because I don't have the overhead. I can get Lexus for $200 a seat versus $1 million a year. I have a different operating cost, and I can pass that savings on to you. Same Harvard lawyers for the last 10 years that have represented you now are on their own. So the competition is totally changing, and the way we buy software, the way they, even staff their IT department is no longer going to be the one guy from, and no offense to any schools, but ITT Tech versus USC Computer Science or whatever. You see what I'm saying? That all changes on how this is all being purchased.
Insert things like litigation funding into the mix with those kind of small firms. And they're putting pressure to eke out even more profit on things like litigation, which is kind of a weird way to look at it. And it's, it's interesting. We've gone down this whole rabbit hole talking about technology and all the things about this industry, but we haven't really talked a lot about like what eDiscovery is really facilitating, which is justice at some point in the process, and two parties in conflict with each other, and they both think they're right. And eDiscovery becomes this kind of like underpinned problem that they're dealing with, and that's how we're talking about it. We're talking about procurement and commodities and things like that, but that's not necessarily how the clients think of it or the lawyers think of it. I mean, it's a process that they're going through in order to get justice, and that I think also changes the dynamics of some of the discussions around AI and things like outcome predictability, because sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes people want their day in court, and how do you put that into an algorithm when you have a GC that's like, well, we're fighting this? I mean, that's it. And so I don't know how technology solves all of that.
I think you're definitely right? Like that is what we're going for, but the problems that we're facing, that we're talking about here, are all of the things that have to align for those goals to be served. Like, yes, this is the guiding light. We want to get to a point where we have an efficient way to get to the truth. We're all into that. But who's going to make that software? Who's going to learn how to do that? Who's going to build those processes? Who's going to figure all that out? Unless there's some interests that are aligned.
Do we want it to be vanilla across? I mean, do we want that to be so turnkey that that's the way it is?
Every case is different. I mean, even though it's the same 5 steps, even though it may be the same litigants, there is a degree of human strategy involved. There's a degree of nuance, even on the data and technology side, that isn't going away. In fact, because the velocity and volume and complexity and variety of data is going up exponentially, it's an even more strategic approach. It's maybe for the traditional unstructured eDiscovery, email, standard, burn and churn, you can kind of know how you're going to move with that. But I'm marrying in, chat and Skype and Slack and video and audio and all this other stuff in order to do a really complex multi-level investigation. And as we keep going and evolving, it's only going to be more data sources. And that's going to require a lot of strategy and make it harder to, I think, have plug-and-play assumptions where you just hit go. Because it is still, it's even more custom than it was 5 years ago, which is funny. Usually you get a little bit more predictable and reliable, and it is, I think, my job's much more interesting today than 5 years ago. I think we were very much simple and kind of settling into a rhythm, and that's been shifting pretty drastically in the last even 18 months.